When I first drove the BMW i4 M50, I was left seriously impressed. But when I requested it for review, I specifically wanted the eDrive40, which we have right here. Now this model comes in at roughly £14,000 cheaper than the M50 variant and competes with the likes of the Polestar 2, the Tesla Model 3, and to an extent the Audi e-tron GT and the Porsche Taycan. Now in this review, I'll be comparing it to its rivals and furthermore expressing my own opinions as to if you should be buying the eDrive40 over the M50. Well, the differences between the two i4s are actually pretty obvious when you look at the spec sheet. Indeed, here the eDrive40 operates on a rear-wheel drive configuration and has a singular rear-mounted motor. The M50, on the other hand, has got two electric motors, one on each axle, and as a result means it's got more power output. Now on paper, the eDrive40 has 250 kilowatts of power. That equates to 340 horsepower. You've got 430 Newton meters of readily available torque, where top speed is rated at roughly 118 miles an hour. Now by comparison, the M50 has got 405 kilowatts of power. That equates to 544 horsepower and therefore gets you a whopping 795 Newton meters of torque, where a top speed is rated at just shy of 140 miles an hour, making it a little bit more attractive for those people who frequent the German Autobahn. Now, what does this mean in real-world differences? Well, of course, the amount of Newton meters of torque that's available on the M50 can certainly be felt when you put your foot down to the metal. However, I tested the M50 at roughly sub 4 seconds, whereas the eDrive40 is not too far behind. At a 0 to 60 time, I've tested 5.32 seconds, which is actually below BMW's claim. I love how the Germans lie in this respect. It's a lying in a good way, whereby their vehicles are actually faster than they appear on paper. What I'm trying to say over here is that if you want the utmost performance from the i4, then of course the M50 is the way to go. But the eDrive40 is not too far behind and still offers a very compelling and very fun vehicle to drive, be it if you're going around windy country roads or pottering around town. But wait, before jumping at the eDrive40, it is worth considering that the adaptive suspension system that comes fitted as standard on the M50 is an absolute work of art, and something I feel that BMW should really be shouting about a little bit more. See, having test-driven and reviewed pretty much all of its competitors, I would say the i4 sits with almost the Porsche Taycan when it comes to the way it handles the roads. The adaptive suspension system does an excellent job when you're pottering around town and therefore soaking up anomalies, speed bumps or potholes, but equally holds its own when you're cornering around speed around windy country roads, and therefore gives you a sense of confidence and further bolsters the overall driver's feel. Now indeed here the adaptive suspension is fitted with the M50 but can be also added on to the eDrive40. The only problem, however, is that it will cost you a pretty penny. £4,000 to be more specific over the base level trim of the eDrive40. That's because you have to go for the M Sport variant, then add the M Pro pack on top of that. So as standard, the eDrive40 instead comes with a rear air suspension setup, which is certainly good, but is no competitor to the likes of the adaptive suspension system that the M Pro pack or indeed the M50 offers. Now, other than its suspension setup, the eDrive40 does have a little less control when you are putting your foot down and, let's say, taking a corner. And by that I mean the rear-wheel drive configuration isn't as composed as the all-wheel drive configuration found on the M50, something I became immediately apparent when it was a little bit wet on the roads and I was putting my foot down on the eDrive40. I noticed the vehicle was slipping a little bit more and therefore losing its back end, which definitely does bring a smile to my face, but equally doesn't give me the same level of confidence as the M50 variant. Now, when it comes to the driver's input and the overall driver's feel, both vehicles are absolutely spectacular. I'd say they're only beaten by the likes of the Porsche Taycan, which still reigns supreme in the EV department. Here the i4 does better job than the Polestar 2 or the Tesla Model 3, and indeed here is a vehicle that you will definitely feel connected with the road under you. Something that I feel that BMW fanboys or fangirls, or indeed those people who are anti-EVs, might be a little bit worried about coming to a pretty heavy and chunky electric vehicle. Well, I will just say from my own experience of having driven ICE-based vehicles to also fully electric cars, that the i4 definitely holds its own in this department and will definitely leave you with a smile on your face when you're cornering or indeed going on windy country roads. Now, so far the M50 is coming out on top on every department other than potentially the overall asking price. But there is one key department for the eDrive40 which might make it more appealing to the average consumer, and that is when it comes to its range. See, the eDrive40 houses the same 83.9 kilowatt-hour battery pack as its M50 counterpart, but does not house a front motor, and as a result makes it lighter and more efficient. Now, I achieved roughly 240 to 260 miles from my mixed driving test, and while it's not quite a fair comparison because the M50 was on a much shorter drive and had been driven by other journalists, potentially being launched quite a few times, I achieved roughly 200 to 210 miles. Now, regardless of that, the discrepancy between the two might not be as extreme if you are just doing a regular test with the M50 and therefore analysing its range. But I will say here that even BMW claim that the vehicles have got a significant difference in terms of their overall range, and that is of course due to the motor configuration that I just mentioned. Ultimately, if you want the longer range i4, you'll have to go for the eDrive40 as opposed to the M50, which still does a decent job in comparison to some of its competitors. Now, speaking of which, here the vehicle, in other words the i4, is still no competition to the Tesla Model 3 long range, nor the likes of the Tesla Model S, which still do a better job when it comes to the overall range and efficiency that one can attain from an EV. But in comparison to its other competitors, say for example the Polestar 2 or the likes of the Porsche Taycan or the Audi e-tron GT, the i4 actually does a really good job in this department and does make it not only a slightly better pick, but also one of the more efficient EVs out there on the market, which is quite surprising given that the vehicle isn't built on a pure EV platform, which might have made it even more efficient and or get even better range had it been the case. Now, very much like the Polestar and the Tesla, the BMW i4 has got a fantastic regenerative braking system, which means that you can lift off from the accelerator pedal and come to a complete standstill. Now, right now I'm in B mode, which is the harshest mode that you can select. In order to activate this, you have to go on the gear selector and shift left. Now, by doing so, you have the harshest level and therefore competes with the likes of the BMW i3, which we're just passing right now. Now, if I were to just lift off the accelerator pedal right now, we're going 15 miles an hour, you'll be able to see I come to a pretty abrupt halt, which is actually really good and therefore gives me the ability to brake whenever I want to by just lifting off the accelerator pedal. Now, the only complaint I've got over here is in order to activate B mode, you have to go on the gear selector, shift left, and do that each time when you step inside the vehicle. Specifically, if you're going into reverse, for example, let's say for example right now, I'm going to have to shift right, go up, go onto reverse, and then start reversing, which makes it a little more cumbersome than just having to just do it automatically in, well, a certain mode such as what Tesla offers, or let's say what Polestar offers. Now, you might be quick to say, wait, there is drive mode, which now I am in, and there is an adaptive mode that you can select via the infotainment system. There's also a high regenerative braking mode via the drive mode, and indeed there is, but right now we're on adaptive mode, so therefore should give me the same sort of regenerative braking and therefore a one pedal driving approach. If I lift off, I am simply coasting. 15 miles an hour, I'm coasting, it's not coming to a standstill, I have to put my foot on the brake pedal. Now, that might seem very trivial to some people, but for those people who do like driving on one pedal, it means that activating B mode each time you step inside the vehicle might seem a little bit cumbersome and a bit tedious given the fact that this is a fully electric vehicle, and as such you might have expected that option through the infotainment system rather than via a physical control that you find on the gear selector. Now, other than regenerative braking, you can of course plug in the vehicle, and here the charging port is rated at 200 kilowatts, and therefore if you find an appropriate rapid charger, you can go from 10 to 80% in just 30 minutes, making it quite convenient if you want to have a quick coffee break. But finding a high speed DC rapid charger like that is a little bit rare, at least at the time of filming. And what you might more commonly come across is the 50 kilowatt chargers. Now here, for the same amount of charge input, it will take roughly an hour in order to get 80%. Now, if you don't want to go via rapid charger and therefore save on money and plug in at home or at a workplace, if you have access to a 3-phase power supply, you can go from 0 to 100% in roughly 8.5 hours. If, however, you're going on a 7 kilowatt charger instead, and therefore don't have access to a 3-phase power supply, it'll take around 12 to 13 hours. If you opt for a 3-pin plug instead, here you're going to be going at around 35 hours from 0 to 100%. Now, at the side of the vehicle where you'd find the charging flap, it's also quite intriguing to see that the German automaker has concealed the door handles. In my case, I actually find them quite intuitive to use and better than the likes of the Tesla Model 3, which requires a certain technique. Now, around the sidal profile, you also have body-colored wheel arches and stylish side skirts, which add to the overall sporty flair. Speaking of which, I would recommend the 18 or 19-inch alloys, depending on which trim level you go for, but you have got the option to go between 17 and 20-inch. Of course, some of these options are not available on the eDrive40 and or the M50. Now, the frontal profile of any modern BMW is always a talking point, and of course here I'm referencing the kidney grille. Thankfully, it's broken up with the use of a number plate, and therefore means that the i4 still preserves a sporty and classy look. Now, its aggressive design still goes out to the rear of the vehicle, whereby the manufacturers use quite stylish tail lights. Similarly, in terms of the rear bumper, the exhaust outlets have been replaced and blocked off with plastic inserts, and therefore almost look like a diffuser. Now, on the subject of its rear profile, of course, this leads me on to boot capacity, and here the electric tailgate that comes fitted in all i4 models can be operated through a button found just above the number plate, within the cabin, or via the remote control. Now, when it does open up, you'll be able to notice that it's got a hatchback design, and therefore is a definite plus point over the likes of the Tesla Model 3, which is a little less practical for those people who have pets and or who have larger size goods that they usually frequent. Now, on that note as well, the vehicle has a 40-20-40 split, which makes it very practical to take elongated goods. Now, here you've got 470 litres of usable capacity with the seats up, and when you prop them down, you've got 1,290 litres. Now, similarly here, there is some underfloor compartment storage should you wish to use it for your charging cables, although the only thing to note over here is if you go for the Harman Kardon audio system, it will dig into the space a little bit more. Now, as for the side mesh compartments, this will come in with the £990 comfort pack, which is slightly a shame to see, but nevertheless is additional storage space that you might want to consider, and therefore go for that pack. The biggest complaint I've got in terms of the storage capacity is the fact that BMW haven't optimized the front storage. In other words, there's no front storage space. Unlike the likes of the Tesla Model 3, which does offer a substantial amount of space at the front of the vehicle, the i4 doesn't have it. Is it a deal breaker? Not in the slightest, but it would have been nice to see BMW optimize the eDrive40, specifically given it doesn't have a front motor, or even include it in the M50, but in a reduced capacity. So what about when it comes to storage within the cabin? Well, at the rear, you're unsurprisingly limited, whereby you can place your valuables in the small rear door bins or via the mesh compartments found towards the rear segment of the front seats. If you do have a coffee cup and there's no one sitting in the middle seats, you can bring down this compartment to reveal an armrest and indeed 2 cup holders. Now, at the front, it's a lot more accommodating for your valuables, whereby you can place them in the glove compartment or in the relatively large size door bins, which can fit a 500ml bottle alongside a small to medium sized purse and or a wallet. Now, the center armrest compartment is quite limited, specifically here if you compare it to the majority of its rivals, specifically the Tesla Model 3, here the BMW i4 cannot compete. But thankfully you do have two cup holders and you've got a non-slip area at the front of the center console. Should you get the M50, you'll have a wireless charging pad over here for a smartphone, or if you go for the eDrive40, you'll have to purchase a £180 option. Now on the subject of options, the heated steering wheel does not come fitted as standard, and as a result makes you have to spend an additional £220. But thankfully this does come included within the comfort pack at £990 should you opt for those rear mesh compartments. Now, it is also similarly disappointing not to see fully electronically adjustable seats and lumbar support fitted as standard on the eDrive40. This comes in at roughly £2,000, which is quite a large sum of money to be spending on such features, but nevertheless does come fitted as standard on the M50 variant. Now, no matter which model you choose, the front seats are very accommodating and have no problems whatsoever when it comes to headroom or legroom. However, the same couldn't be quite said about the rear of the cabin, whereby headroom is limited as someone who's just under 6 foot, and similarly when it comes to legroom, I just can't quite extend my legs, and as a result means my knees are propped up above my waist. And if I was going on longer commutes and I was at the rear of the cabin, I'd feel my quad muscles would get a little bit tired. Similarly here, it's a shame that BMW have not removed the transmission tunnel, and this is something of a selling point of electric vehicles and that some of its competitors can offer, and therefore if you're taking 3 people frequently, the rear male occupant might be left a little bit more uncomfortable. Now on that note as well, getting in and out of the rear portion of the cabin is a little bit tricky, and that's due to the design of the B pillar and C pillar. Now this will be a non-issue for children, but for those adults out there, you might find it to be not as intuitive as some of its competitors. Now on the subject of its competitors, both the Tesla Model 3 and the Polestar 2 offer a fully panoramic glass roof, which makes it an absolute joy when you're sat at the rear of the cabin. But alas, that's not the case in the BMW i4. In this respect, if you do want some extra light coming into the cabin, or more specifically at the front of the cabin, you'll have to opt for the £1,050 glass roof option. Now what I really do love is the use of technology, and while I do miss the use of physical climate control buttons, I think the overall infotainment system and the instrument cluster is absolutely fantastic and arguably class leading. The 14.9-inch display that feeds into the 12.3-inch instrument cluster is vivid and fully responsive. Better still, they support Android Auto and Apple CarPlay in both a wired and wireless format. And yes, in other words, the instrument cluster and the infotainment system will show all the navigation data. If you want to further bolster the experience in the eDrive40, you'll have to splash out around £1,900 on the tech pack in order to attain the head-up display, which I feel would have been great inclusion within this price point, but does come included as standard in the M50. Now another area where the M50 shines in comparison to its cheaper sibling is when it comes to its audio system. Now for those people who are subscribed, you know I do dedicated audio reviews of every vehicle I get in, and indeed there's one for the i4. It'll be up on your pop banner, down description below, or indeed in the pinned comments. What I will say in a nutshell is the Harman Kardon audio system is absolutely phenomenal. So for those people who go for the M50, you'll be left with a smile on your face. However, for those people who go for the eDrive40, certainly do consider upgrading for £820 to the Harman Kardon audio system if you really want to bolster the overall audio listening experience that you're getting within the BMW i4. Now on the subject of technology, this brings me on to the driver assistance systems, which are a little bit scarce on the i4 in terms of its base configuration, whereby you're limited to basic cruise control, a speed limiter, and the obvious emergency brake assist, which are going to be handy when it comes to safety. But if you want the adaptive cruise control, the lane positioning assistance with the steering, and also a whole bunch of other clever technology which keeps you a little bit safer and makes motorway driving a little less, well, cumbersome, then you're going to have to spend £1,900 on the technology pack within the M50 and spend around £3,800 on the eDrive40 variant, which is a little bit of a shame, but I must say, having tested it on the motorway, it is among one of the best driving systems that I've come across. It is similar to the likes of the Volvo, and in some instances actually better than what Tesla offers in terms of its autonomous driving capabilities. I really do think that the BMW i4 does take a lot of stress away when it comes to driving on the motorway, and the systems work absolutely faultlessly, and it just left me quite speechless to know that the vehicle was doing all the hard work, including accelerating, decelerating, keeping a distance in front from the leading vehicle, and also recognizing speed changes dynamically while on the go. all of which are definitely recommended, although the overall asking price might throw off quite a few consumers. Now, on the subject of options, the fantastic high-resolution 3D surround cameras are not fitted as standard, at least not on the eDrive40, and as a result means that you're going to have to splash out some extra cash. Now, if you are not too bothered about looking around the side and the front of your vehicle, you'll be pleased to know that BMW have incorporated a rear view camera, although I do think this is a necessity and somewhat expected in a vehicle of its price tag. The reason I say that is because the rear view window is somewhat limited in terms of visibility, so when you're peering around your shoulder. And furthermore, given the fact that you don't have a rear wiper, it means that when it does get a little bit muddy and or when you're not traversing at speed, you'll notice that the raindrops do not just simply go away from the rear view window and mean that you're going to have to rely on that rear view camera instead. And that is why BMW have potentially included it as standard on every i4, and again, something that you might expect given the overall price tag of the vehicle. So would I recommend the BMW i4? Well, frankly, no matter if you go for the more sensible eDrive40 or the more feature-packed and fun-to-drive M50, you're getting a phenomenal package. Indeed, here I think the German automaker has made its best electric vehicle to date, and arguably one of the best electric saloons available out there. Indeed, it gets a similar sort of range as the Polestar 2, while still providing you a familiar design like the Audi e-tron GT. It gives you a similar sort of driving dynamics as a Porsche Taycan, and then as for range, it is competing with the likes of the Polestar 2 and the regular Tesla Model 3. Of course, it won't compete with the Tesla Model 3 long range in terms of pure distance or charging infrastructure, but for those people who want a bit more of driving dynamics and a bit more of familiar interior, the i4 strikes a good balance. Now, as a result, it actually gets our Best Buy award. Now, we would be intrigued to hear your thoughts of the vehicle down in the comment section below. And of course, if you had to pick between the eDrive40 or the M50, which model would you choose? Now, if you've liked this detailed independent review, definitely do drop a like, subscribe and hit that bell notification if you haven't already, all of which would be greatly appreciated. As such, I've been Chris from TotallyEV, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Take care and goodbye.